All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to Spy Chat. I'm Amanda Olkey, Director of Adult Education at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. We have two really fascinating speakers. My boss, the extraordinary Executive Director of the International Spy Museum, Chris Costa, will be leading the conversation. And he's joined today by the Honorable Christopher C. Miller, who recently served as the Acting Secretary of Defense of the United States. In that role, from November 9th, 2020 to January 20th, 2021, Chris Miller oversaw the military's $720 billion budget and led its 2 million service members and 700,000 civilian employees. Prior to that appointment, the Senate unanimously confirmed Miller on August 6, 2020, as the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. Miller became a political appointee in January 2020 to lead the Department of Defense's counterterrorism and irregular warfare efforts. He also served temporarily as the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations. His tasks were defeating Al Qaeda, recovering American hostages, and transforming the Department of Defense to compete against rising powers through irregular and non traditional means. From March 2018 through December 2019, Miller served as the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Counterterrorism and Transnational Threats at the White House's National Security Council. As the government's senior most policy-making official in these fields, Miller developed and implemented strategy and policy and provided counsel to the National Security Advisor, Vice President, and President. Previously, Miller served 27 years as an Army officer in the infantry and special forces. As a Green Beret, he planned and participated in the invasions of Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003, in addition to numerous other deployments worldwide. Chris Costa and Chris Miller are each going to talk about topics that are on their minds right now, and then we'll turn the program over to you and your questions. Now, before I turn this over to Chris Costa, I want to share our very special thanks to our terrific sponsor, the Honorable Mary Beth Long, who serves on the International Spy Museum Board of Directors, and she is an outstanding supporter of the museum. And her continuing sponsorship is joined today by Softwolf. They have the admirable mission of preparing the youth of the fallen for career opportunities in STEM. And we want to thank their founders, Sarah Mula and Mike Vaughn. We really cannot tell you how much we appreciate sponsors like you. We can't do this without you, literally. Now, over to you, Chris Costa.
Hey, Amanda, as always, thanks for the great introduction. And thank you also to our special sponsors. We are super grateful that we have such support from the community. So I'm really excited to welcome Chris Miller today. I'm anxious to hear his answers to questions and hear what he's thinking about. So that said, I want to dive right in. The first story I want to talk about, it got my attention. It's about sabotage. It's about covert action, and it has to do with the Czech Republic. There were blasts in 2014 that were not tied to the Russians at the time, but recently the Czech Republic said not only was it tied to Russian intelligence services, but more specifically, it is believed that it is tied to Unit 29155. We've talked about that unit for some time. It is a covert action unit employed by the GRU, Russian military intelligence, to do sensitive activities and covert actions, such as the explosives that took place or the explosions that took place in 2014 in the Czech Republic that incidentally killed 2 Czech Republic citizens. Now, it's important to note this same unit was the unit that is believed to be complicit in poisoning Sergei Skripal, who of course was a Russian intelligence officer and a former Russian spy in the UK, the United Kingdom, back in 2018. Transitioning, but the same subject, covert action, clandestine operations that continue to take place at sea, and it has to do with Israel and it has to do with Iran. There's a shadow war that continues to happen at sea between Israel and Iran that maybe many of the listeners haven't been tracking. In short, this war has taken place at sea. The Israelis have attacked 10 to 20 vessels that are believed to be uh, carrying contraband on the high seas. And at the same time, recently in the last week or so, there was an attack of a freighter that had Israeli cargo that was destined to the Far East. So this tit for tat clearly is an extremely dangerous situation. We need to pay attention to this situation that has been playing out. We hope that it doesn't escalate. And I would argue that it is not designed to sink these vessels. It is designed both by the Israelis and the Iranians to be an irritant, to disable vessels that in the cases of Iran in particular, those vessels are carrying contraband destined for places like Lebanon, Syria, and of course, the Assad regime is complicit in violating sanctions, and the Iranians will help them with violating those sanctions. So that's something I've been paying attention to, and that's a great segue into another insider threat, and that has to do with Iran being extremely rattled right now. Rattled because in the last 9 months, there have been a series of attacks that demonstrate a counterintelligence vulnerability on the ground in Iran. What am I talking about? We talked in past spy chats about an Al Qaeda operator, a terrorist, I should say, that was assassinated. He was assassinated by what is believed to be an Israeli operation on the ground in Iran. At the same time, there was an Iranian scientist uh, that was killed also in Iran. Another covert action believed to be Israelis, at least according to the Iranians. And at the same time, recently there have been at least two explosions at Natanz that are unexplained. All of that really amounts to a significant concern from an Iranian standpoint. And it demonstrates, if you listen to the Iranian reporting, a sense of paranoia, a sense of really uncertainty on the security environment on the ground in Iran. So significant vulnerabilities, and it really reinforces what we talk about in some of our exhibits here at the Spy Museum, and that is the ultimate insider threat. All right, plain old fashioned espionage operation. I love when these pop. It's interesting that it took place in Italy. We haven't talked a lot about Italy recently, but on the ground in Italy, a Navy captain, and remember, Italy is a member of NATO, passed NATO and Italian secrets to a GRU officer, a military intelligence officer. He was caught red handed. The Italian was a Navy captain. His wife had subsequently said that he needed the money. That was his motivation for spying at the behest of Russia. Two Russians were sent and declared persona non grata and sent home to Russia. So classic espionage continues to play out on the European continent as well as covert actions. And you'll recall, if you're tracking, last month we talked about operations that were uncovered in Bulgaria. So we'll continue to watch these classic operations as they're revealed to us in the media. I'm going to transition now to terrorism stories that I'm tracking. Not going to spend a lot of time here, but there's an open question. Will Afghanistan become a terrorism safe haven? Are we vulnerable, for we being the United States, for another attack that emanates from Afghanistan in the future as US and NATO forces continue to retrograde out of Afghanistan? How vulnerable are we? I'll save that to questions and answers and discussions, but I will also make the point that the US intelligence community in the short term believes that, in essence, we are not vulnerable to an attack that comes from Afghanistan, at least in the short term. I think the long term is an open ended question, and we need to watch that closely. Another story I'll talk briefly about really got my attention, and I had an opportunity to speak about this on BBC World World at One, I believe, is the program. I think we'll post the link. And it's about ISIS in Africa. It's something I'm paying very close attention to. Of course, the Western coalition, 80 plus countries, went after ISIS and took the physical caliphate away from ISIS on the ground in Syria and Iraq. All of that said, at the time, the community judged, the intelligence community judged that ISIS would go elsewhere. It would look for fertile ground to take its ideology, to take some of its finances and rebuild. We're seeing some of that come together right now on the ground in the African continent. And in particular, what a story in the Wall Street Journal got to is the idea that some of these countries on the African continent, like Mozambique, like the Congo, are dominant Christian countries where there's a disenfranchised Muslim minority. And ISIS is finding that those places are fertile ground to recruit, to fund, and some of that played out recently in an attack in Mozambique. So pay attention to what happens on the African continent. It's not something we should collectively take our eyes off of. It'll be interesting to hear Chris's perspective if we were able to cover that as well. And one of the final stories I want to foot stomp, and it's important for us to talk about it continually on Spy Chat, and the idea of hostages being held by countries that don't acknowledge that they're holding hostages. What country? Syria is holding Austin Tice. We have talked about Western hostages and other hostages on this program. We'll continue to talk about the intelligence communities and diplomatic entreaties to focus on bringing those hostages home to their families. And of course, Austin Tice has been held since 2012, and the Syrian government refuses to acknowledge that they're holding Austin. There was a good piece in the New York Times written by Adam Goldman, and he provided essentially a summary of all the work that's been done. And I believe Chris was quoted in that article. So I won't spend any more time talking about it. It's just another reminder that we have hostages that are being held overseas by countries that refuse to acknowledge that they're holding them. The last article I really want to dive in for just a moment is a opinion piece by Mark Polymeropoulos. I think I said Mark's name wrong. I will get that right because we have future programs with Mark. He's a former case officer, an intrepid former CIA operations officer. And Mark wrote an excellent piece called The Three R's, a case officer perspective on future CIA and special operations forces relations. In short, US special operations and CIA. How are they going to operate in a post 9/11 world global power competition where Russians are our adversaries again? So Mark's thesis is relationships, resources, and Russia are his three R's, which means that relationships that have been forged by those two communities, the intelligence community and the CIA community, forged in fighting the CT threat, the counterterrorism threat, though that work, those personal relationships, those bonds that have been established between CIA officers and Department of Defense officers, those bonds will make us more effective in doing what? Going after Russians like Unit 29155. It's speculation on my part, and some of his opinion piece was hypothetical, but the idea of special operations and CIA blending capabilities to conduct pattern of life analysis, just like we did going after Al Qaeda targets, focusing on Russian intelligence officers, not kinetically, but to disrupt operations like we have been talking about for months and months. I think that's an important thesis. I look forward to hearing from Mark in future programs, and I'll be anxious to hear what Chris thinks about that. Last point, I always like to make a book recommendation. My recommendation, it's a long title. It is Never Mind, We'll Do It Ourselves, the inside story of how a team of renegades broke rules, shattered barriers, and launched a drone warfare revolution. In short, this book went through the appropriate policy reviews so it could be published. unclassified. It tells a great story of how the drone program evolved over time. So now I am anxious to turn this over and hear from my longtime friend and former colleague, the Honorable Chris Miller. So over to you, Chris.
Chris. Okay, so there's a conflict of interest here, folks, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. First off, well, Chris and I have known each other for 24 years, and he's been a mentor and a role model for me, but still, I was thinking we'd go a little different for Spy Chat. You're putting your career at risk again for me, and I know this is a very august forum, but I just want to remind you of two things. We rehearsed his name numerous times, and you had it. You nailed it. And number two, you were only supposed to talk for 10 minutes, and you went over. I only get 10 minutes. That's all right. I really appreciate it. Hey, I'm in my basement because I wanted kind of a motif, right? Kind of spooky. Got Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain behind me. You know, little shout out to the original kind of reconnaissance forces that we had. Amanda, I know you're just terrified right now that I'm on air, that your job's at risk as well. I won't let you down. Mary Beth Long, thanks a ton for continuing to serve. Thanks for all you did back in the day. And I know
Chris Miller.
Yes.
Takes a lot more than you to scare me.
Barstool Sports, guys. I'm telling you, I think we go there. And yeah, if my voice goes hoarse, it's all right. Some of you are probably aware I spent 5 hours yesterday, quote unquote, on the Hill, but you're not really on the Hill. You're on Zoom now. But that's all right. I was at my lawyer, or I had an attorney. I did that professional liability insurance for the first time in my life. Thank goodness I did that. So I had an attorney assigned. So I was at his law office. So if I start getting hoarse, I got wire brushed for 5 hours. Easy day, Green Beret. I got that. But it's really nice to be on board with this group. I'm sure the attendee list is dropping rapidly as I just continue to riff here for a minute. But it's really good to be with a bunch of professionals that are focused on really serious issues and outcomes, as opposed to just partisanship and political warfare, which is something we should talk about ultimately, but you guys are the experts. I also, Sarah and Mike, awesome. Really appreciate you helping out with this thing and all the great work you're doing. It's so important that we have help for veterans because, Chris, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to get political. We need all the help we can get beyond government has its role, but it's really about our citizens and philanthropic organizations. So thanks for doing this. Looking at this thing, career government official, and now I'm on Zoom and a business person. I clearly have a face for radio. It's horrifying. I want to talk about our conflict of interest. The theme is the mean executive officer. Young Captain Chris Miller shows up at the squadron in summer 1998. I'm a Troop XO, so that's second in command, and you're responsible for all the bad stuff and taking care of things. The first person I am responsible for reporting to is the squadron executive officer. The squadron executive officer is the legendary Chris Costa, Major 1H. The role of the executive officer is to be the bad person. They do all the knife fighting and say all the things that need to be done and say the things that need to be said to people so that the commander can be the nice person. Well, boy, I've never met a better XO, because I show up there and I literally meet the meanest person I've ever met in my life. That would be Major Costa, who proceeds to tell me everything that I've done wrong for the last year. I did not know that he was tracking my career at that point. I found out quite soon after. And I decided that not only did I not like Chris Costa, I found him to be a very obnoxious and mean person. And I did not like Chris Costa. And lo and behold, 24 years later, Chris Costa is not only a mentor, but a dear friend and a close colleague, and is responsible for good or bad. My wife has not decided yet, Chris, whether you're in good camp or bad camp, because let's fast forward to winter 2017. I'm in intelligence oversight at the Pentagon. I am cramming 1 hour a day of work into 8 hours, and I'm miserable. And I get a text from Mr. Costa, who says, I'm leaving the National Security Council, Special Assistant to the President for, and Senior Director for Counterterrorism. Would you be interested in interviewing? Like a gift of water to a desperate man in the desert, I obviously respond, absolutely. I tell my children, always interview for a job. You're going to get a repetition in and you might get the job. And this was at the White House. So Chris sets me up for that and puts me on this trajectory of my next phase of my life. So 2 more mean XO stories. I think I have 4 minutes. Amanda, 4 minutes. What do you say? Number 1 was
you can have extra time. You're our guest.
These we've got people out in the field right now that have questions that they want to ask. And I respect that. And I think that's the strength of this show, to tell you the truth, is that it's the give and take. And I don't want to be just droning on. So I get the job and I call Chris one night. I'm in my kitchen and I didn't know anything about hostages, not a thing. I get that job. Chris is like, hey, yeah, there's some other stuff you have to do about hostages, helping out their families and all. Never been involved in that. And some families were coming in the next day. I was really, really busy. So I called Chris and I whined like I always do. And I'm like, Chris, what the heck? Why do I have to talk to all these families? He proceeds to give me the worst butt chewing I'd had in quite a while, mean XO. And he goes, you know what? I'll tell you why. Because they're American citizens and we don't leave anybody behind. We go to the ends of the earth to bring back those that are unlawfully detained or imprisoned or being held hostage. When I was done with that, I was almost in tears again. I felt about this big, but the mean XO came out and just got my head right, like he always had. And, you know, we talked to hostages earlier. It became my passion because, and it does, everyone who gets involved in this field goes to the ends of the earth. And it's such an emotional thing. And I just want to highlight those that are being held by the Iranians. I just, you know, nonpartisan, non-political. I really, really hope as we move forward with talking and trying to establish relationships with the Iranians, that we make sure that we don't leave anybody behind this time, like we did last time. Not criticizing anybody. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I just know we left some behind. And, you know, Austin Tice is still being held. Jeffrey Woodkey's still being held. Mark Ferrix is still being held. And we brought up Afghanistan. Want to make sure we don't, you know, we want to make sure Mark is part of any drawdown or the process as we go forward. And then Jeffrey Woodkey, like, we just got to keep after him. And we talked about Africa, Chris. Man, I'll tell you what, all about it. That was Mozambique is really troubling for me. Number 2, mean XO story is I decided when I got there at the National Counterterrorism Center, or I'm sorry, at the NSC, at the National Security Council, I decided to do net assessment on where we were in terrorism. I was always an unconventional warfare guy. I was like, you know, PhD level stuff. We parachute behind enemy lines and create resistance armies, and the counterterrorism stuff, they're all like, oh, that's unimaginative. You go left or you go right when you go through the door. And I was complete elitist, arrogant snob, and self-admitted at the time, realizing, not really knowing the big picture. Did the net assessment and decided that I thought we had some capabilities against Al Qaeda, and I thought they were weaker than we were. And I talked to Chris, because Chris literally, you know, you got Bruce Hoffman, you got Jenkins, you got some other folks out there. Oh, I did buy Bruce's book. Bruce, if you're listening, man, I bought it out there at the used bookstore in Manassas. I forgot the name of it. I bought it for $1.38. It was like the 4th edition, man. Sorry, I owe you a drink next time I see you. Really good book, really good primer, however you pronounce it. I still don't know how to pronounce that. And really helpful book. I think you're on version 8 by this point. But Chris, you know, he was like the guy I was able to talk with in confidence and talk about what the meaning of defeat is and what that means for our country. And I got roundly criticized, still do, for even bringing it up. I think it's a discussion that we're having now at last, and you brought it up in your opening comments, Chris. Horribly honored to be here. Probably not worthy. I'll try not to curse, and I'll try not to. Chris, you always trusted me. You recognize that my greatest strength is also my greatest weakness, which is I just say what's on my mind. And you recognized in an era in the military where that was not regarded well, you protected me and helped me out. And I really owe you and thank you. And I'm honored to be here today. I promise I will not say anything enormously stupid that you have to edit out or that the general counsel calls you after the podcast. So over to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Chris Miller and Chris Costa. And let me tell you guys, behind the scenes, the XO stories were even more exciting. So you put the chat into Spy Chat, Chris Miller. So thank you. A different flavor, but we love it. And now we get to the questions, and I'm gonna lead off with a January 6th question, but surprisingly, we have many fewer of those than anticipated. But someone writes that Defense One reported that you, Chris Miller, were hesitant to send troops to the Capitol because it would be perceived that they would be used to support President Trump's election challenge, or worse. Would you comment on the accuracy of that reporting, if you can, without your lawyer?
Oh yeah, lawyer, heck with him. Again, maybe I should call my lawyer. I was trying to highlight, thank you for the question. What I was trying to highlight was that it's the narrative that we were just sitting on our hands was ridiculous. And we have to remember history matters in the military, right? It matters with this community too, like past is prologue in many cases. In some cases, we don't want it to be. And we have to remember the hyper partisan narrative that was going on out there. So that was one factor that really concerned me, because I had people like really, really rational, mature, what I thought were intelligent people that were calling me going, are you really going to overthrow? These are people that I'd known for like my entire career, and family, friends, and also a hell of a lot of friends. Sorry, did I just curse? A lot of friends of friends that would call and say, you're going to overthrow the country. I was absolutely flabbergasted that we were at a place in America where people would even consider that, because our military is never going to do that, because they swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, to an idea, not to any person or political party. But that was the tone at the time. But I wanted to bring up history also, because I felt I had a heavy responsibility to those that went forward before us. And remember, in the late 60s and early 70s, the United States military became actively involved in domestic intelligence gathering. And it was a result, it starts with the best of intentions, right? It always does, because we have really, really good people in the military. Nobody starts out like, oh, I'm going to be an evil SOB. They don't, that's not the purpose. But, you know, after Detroit and Washington burning, the military got the mission to be ready to respond to civil disturbances. So like any good brigade commander, the commander of the Devils in Baggy Pants or whatever in the 82nd goes, hey, I got the south side of Chicago, or south side of Detroit. What's he do? Logically, he goes to his S2, his intel officer, and goes, hey, I want to know everything that's going on. Maybe we should put some people up there. This continues, right? And before long, we have detachments all over America that are spying on American citizens, and without really any oversight. And they started with the best of intentions, but it just the logical evolution. And I was like, we're not doing it. I will not let that happen on my watch.
All right. Well, that kind of plays into an interesting question from a Canadian viewer who says that he understands it's very hard for American intelligence agencies to gather intel on American citizens. And how do American agencies overcome these challenges in regards to the rise of homegrown white nationalism, white supremacy, and the sadly increasingly hostile divisions that we...
I think Mr. Costa gets this one. Can you see him? He's like, I got this. Don't let Miller go. don't let him say anything. I'm going to close. Hey, dude, I'll hit cleanup. You go, because we've talked about this. And then I have a really smart aleck comment. It's not a smart aleck comment, but I'd like to close out.
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. First of all, Chris, thanks for all of your remarks. I was never as mean as you just articulated. I didn't think I was, but you did get to the heart, and I appreciate our Canadian friends' question. We are very, very cognizant in the U.S. intelligence community of our responsibilities to not violate the rights of the American citizens. And that is why, and Chris alluded to it, Mr. Miller alluded to it, that is why we are so cognizant of our responsibility to protect those rights, which means, in general, we don't want to declare the Proud Boys a terrorist organization. We don't want our intelligence services to focus intelligence collection on our citizenry. We've made those mistakes in the 1970s, in the 1960s. We talk about some of those stories here at the Spy Museum. COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program that was run by the FBI and Department of Defense. I would just also end on this point. I was a young counterintelligence agent before I even met Mr. Miller. And we learned that we were very restricted in the kinds of investigations that we did as a result of the overreach of the Department of Defense, as a result of the overreach of the intelligence community. So we are very, very mindful of our responsibilities. That said, the idea of domestic terrorism, the idea of declaring citizens part of a group as domestic terrorists, that is very, very dangerous ground. And in short, we can focus on ensuring that individuals don't violate the law by employing the FBI, by employing DHS, by empowering local law enforcement. Really, we don't have to empower them. They have the authorities. They might need additional funding. I think that we have to focus on additional funding. We have to ensure that we don't over litigate as a result of the current problems we're dealing with. And in short, I think we have the tools that we need to ensure that there isn't intelligence overreach. We've already made those mistakes in the past. And that was reinforced to me my whole career. And Mr. Miller as well. Chris would have gone to intelligence oversight briefings perhaps twice a year to ensure that we never violated the principles of overreach.
It sounds cliche, but power corrupts absolutely. And there's a tendency, and I talked about everything starts with the best of intentions, and it always does. There are very few evil people. I don't think I've ever met an evil person in our government, truly. But somehow, oftentimes, it's just the nature of the bureaucracy. Eventually, things kind of get out of control. I just wanted to highlight that I was so frustrated in the last couple of jobs with the FBI because I felt that they were so programmatic, and they had so many so much process that they had to go through. And it dawned on me one day, and this is close to home for Chris because he has loved ones that know what I'm talking about. It dawned on me that's exactly what we want. And Chris, it was about hostage stuff. You're like, come on, let's just get after it. And they were very, very disciplined in how they employed their tools and their authorities. And it dawned on me one day, like, I'm slow, obviously, to learn. And I was like, that's exactly what we want with our National Police Service. And the only people that are authorized to conduct domestic intelligence. I said, we want them that have a lot of lawyers to look at it. Because, there are sometimes you're like, man, come on, can we just get going? No, we need 3 more lawyers to look at it. But that's exactly what we want. But here's my closing point. Man, when they get everything signed and all the structures in place, and they have their authorities and all the T's are crossed. I always get that wrong. I was going to say T's are dotted. You know what I mean? When it's all done, man, if you're an opponent and you're breaking the law, you do not want the FBI in the case, man. They are the most unbelievable professionals. And you're like, I'm going to give, if we have any, we just have good people on the line. We don't have the opposition. Man, don't get on their radar scope. Don't do something that brings the scrutiny of the FBI, because they're going to do it legally. I talked about institutionally. There are instances where there are some people that have abused their trust and authority. We're not going there. But when it comes, don't get on the FBI's radar scope, because they're going to bring the full weight of the law. And I'm with you, Chris. I'm like, we got good laws. I think we need to keep teasing through the domestic terrorism thing, because I think it's good for America that we have this discussion. But man, remember in the 60s, 70s, we were doing stuff to the left. Now we'll do it. We just need to be mature about this and just recognize the danger. But I think there's some opportunities too.
Well, we have it's really cool with the questions. We have some very distinct categories. And I was going to go one way, but then I just totally got totally taken away by the fact that we have a 16-year-old watching, and she says the Spy Museum is her favorite place in DC. So hint, guys, I will ask a question that includes a compliment to the Spy Museum right off the bat. And she is wondering what the next steps should be regarding the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and our relationship with Iran and their support of Hamas. Thank you for that question. 16-year-old.
Yeah, that's like, by the way, ma'am, that's like a PhD level question. Yeah. And it's really, wow, how cool is that you guys, this podcast or this live, whatever the heck we call it. My kids will make fun of me after this. Like, Dad, you said the wrong thing. Hey, I said Call of Duty once. They're like, it's not Call of Duty, it's Call of Duty. I'm like, I lost cool points. That's a great question. I'm going to let Chris go first, because I literally have to think about that one. We were watching TV. My wife and I were watching TV this morning, and there was this wonderful, I couldn't believe, I won't tell you what channel we were watching. But it was a long form journalism piece. My wife was like, wow, that is so good. I didn't think they actually did stuff like that. I thought we were just supposed to yell at each other. But wow, what a great question. Chris, I bought you enough time to think through it. Now you're going to talk, and then I'm going to riff off you, because that is like the most complex, important question. And it's the definition of a wicked problem. Wicked problem being, if it was easy, it already would have been solved. So Chris, over to you.
I can give you one more moment as Chris collects his thoughts on the PhD level question, which is another question that came in, which is maybe a little bit easier angle in, which is, what do Americans most commonly confuse on this topic? So there are two questions.
Well, first of all, that was a terrific question. It caused me to stammer a bit, even when I had time to think. So thank you to that 16-year-old listener. And also, have your parents please bring you to the museum. We'll take you up on the roof and do a great picture on our rooftop. Thank you for the question. So in short, it is a wicked problem, as Chris mentioned. I had an opportunity, and I don't know if Chris remembers me talking to him about this, to go to Israel and Jordan. I won't get into the details, but I had an opportunity to work on de-escalation of tensions that started in Jerusalem and started spilling over. Not as serious as what we're seeing right now. So diplomacy works. And that means the United States has a role in diplomacy to de-escalate the situation, but that won't get to the core problem that the Palestinians have. So a couple other issues that complicate the situation we're dealing with. So I already mentioned the importance of continued diplomacy. President Biden, my understanding is, got on the phone and talked to Netanyahu. He acknowledged that the rockets that are coming from Gaza are completely unacceptable, and they are, because they're killing innocent civilians. It's not directed at military barracks or something of that nature. So, and in short, Hamas are a terrorist organization as the United States defines them. All of that said, there's an even bigger problem, and that is Abu Abbas has lost his ability to have a seat at the table. So therein goes the problem. Who is representing Egypt, perhaps the Palestinian interests, because they do have legitimate grievances. So first, the situation has to be de-escalated diplomatically. Secondly, we West and in any other countries that have influence in the region cannot accept that Hamas is firing rockets at Israel, and the Israelis certainly will not accept that. So we have to continue to focus on diplomacy and working on getting the Palestinians to the table. It brokered some kind of agreement that seems to be off the rails as a result of not having a boss to talk to, not having a viable, Palestinian authority right now. Who's going to fill that void? It seems to be Hamas, and that is untenable. And certainly Iran continues to be a spoiler. They continue to exploit these kinds of scenes. So I am very, very concerned, but all of that is not to say that this situation is not intractable. It can be essentially slowed and de-escalated by solid diplomacy, and the United States has to be involved with it, from my perspective.
I was going to not be helpful at all. What concerned me this morning when I was watching this, and you brought it up, Chris, I'm going to call you Mr. Costa. No, it's just Chris. You're Chris C. I'm Chris M. And you brought up Abbas and Netanyahu, and I know I overquote Clausewitz too often, and it sounds cliche, but this is the definition of war as a continuation of politics by other means. And you know what concerned me this morning? When you see the political situation that Netanyahu is in, and you see the political situation that Abbas is in, and then you see the situation that Hamas is in, they all literally see themselves as gaining more politically by fighting right now. I couldn't agree more, though, that I do think that there's an opportunity for a reset. That's overused, but there's an opportunity for U.S. diplomacy and to really not transform, but just disrupt the process, because we've had a different relationship in the past, and there could be a door open for us to get more engaged. You brought up Iranians. At the end of the day, it sounds cliche too. I know I'm just, if you don't know what to say, just use cliches. I heard that. I'm living proof of that. Now, but we've said for ages, the Iranians hold the key to so much in that region. And wouldn't it be nice? Is there a chance for grand bargain? And, don't overreach, play small ball and all that. But I just wonder if the situation might not be right, because you can say what you want about the Abraham Accords or whatever. There's a lot moving right now. There's a lot going on. And it seems like there might be an opportunity for a changed diplomatic approach. But I'm with you, like in the short term, everybody's getting to check out their weapon systems, and there's no political reason right now for them to stand down. And my feeling is it's going to take international involvement, like the old days. Remember the old days where the international coalition would come in and like, boom. I think we're going to have to do that again to get this thing wound down, because it's just intolerable.
Adjacent question is, how important are dollars from drug trafficking in the U.S. to funding rocket attacks against Israel? If that
No
resonates.
idea. Great question. That is a great question. And so I'll riff off that. Did you set that question up? Because I had some notes and I'm like, I really want to cover transnational threats. I didn't clear any of this with Chris Costa. But Chris and I dealt, still breaking up the scar tissue, Chris, for some of those bureaucratic fights that are still going on about the linkages, because Chris and I are network people, using cliches again, but if you understand the networks, there's a different approach. And Chris, frankly, did some cutting edge work on that over the years. And so I don't know the answer to your question. And that's the problem, because if we had the ability to fuse all these disparate data lakes. I learned all this. The National Counterterrorism Center, wow, data lake, love it. But we have all these pools of
Could you
data.
speak English, Mr. Miller?
We have these data lakes at weird places, Treasury Department, border, CBP, ICE, and some organizations in the government do really, really good at it. But we are literally, let's use another analogy, not in any baseball game. Chris, you can argue with me. I think we're in the top of the third. We could do so much more. And I want to highlight that the people that did the work after 2001, September 11, 2001, and built out these protocols and this technology and these systems for breaking down that wall. And Sharon, that was just for terrorism. I know we can do the same thing for transnational threats. There's some bureaucratic equities that are at stake that we have to break through. So I can't answer your question, and we should be able to answer your question. I never, ever in my previous career in government had that question asked or was provided information about that. That was kind of one of those things that should be provided information on. Over to you, Chris. Costa.
I will answer that question partially by saying that the United States has done excellent work in the last few years on going after Hezbollah's finances, not Hamas, or if we have, I've not been tracking it. I was very much focused in the White House from 17 to 18, 2018, focused on Hezbollah, and I know that work continued very well, working with foreign partners from South America to Europe, putting pressure on Hezbollah because they clearly want to proliferate weapons that are very dangerous and inimical to Israel. So going after finances is important, finances that support rockets. And again, tie this back to the clandestine war at sea. The reason why Israel is so aggressive toward vessels that are proliferating weapons in the Middle East is because those weapons ultimately are going to impact Israeli security. So that's just a general way of saying I am confident that the United States is focused on any funding that's going toward material support to terrorists or any other groups that are violating international law.
I can't let it go. That's a serious question, but you always make fun of me for using big words. So I looked it up on my handheld computer, and I'm going to inimical. Let's do that again. Inimical. You pronounced it perfectly. Tending to obstruct or harm. Perfect word, man. Always learning from you, man. Well done. Inimical. Bam. I pronounced it wrong.
You did not say it right. All right. We will practice later. But totally different subject. And this relates a little bit to Mark Polymeropoulos. Secretary Miller, you have been refreshingly vocal about the lack of attention the U.S. government has given to government officials who have been victimized by directed energy weapons. Can you share your thoughts on this topic and specifically discuss what has been or should be done and whether it was substantiated that attacks occurred on U.S. soil? And these are the, yeah.
Oh, sorry. Never interrupt. Amanda, I want to apologize for interrupting.
This format is made for interrupting. I was just going to say to people, if they had not heard of it as the directed energy weapons, first we were hearing about attacks, I guess, in Cuba on CIA officers and in Moscow, and these were maybe the microwave attacks, I just wanted to explain a little bit more about the attacks in a bad way.
I just crossed my arms. That's not that I'm being defensive or anything. My hands are cold because I'm in the basement. Thanks for the question. And here's what I was trying to do is I was worried. One of the things I wanted to do and did with the team at the Department of Defense was make sure that we don't ignore what to many people in a large bureaucracy seem as like, this is a small thing. I don't know why we're spending so much time on this. It's only affecting a handful of people. And, you've got a healthcare system. And so one of our things was, support American fighting people, veterans and their families. and give voice to those that aren't being heard. And this was clearly like, so a guy came in, and I won't give you his name but he's a brilliant, impassioned person of character and integrity that, is what our government's all about. And he's like, hey man, we got a problem. And I think he did call me man because we're pretty close. He probably called Secretary Miller. I was like, just call me man. And he gave me evidence that was irrefutable. And I'd heard, because I'd read the New Yorker article of a couple of years ago, and I heard about this, but it was always the intelligence side of the house, right? So it wouldn't have been appropriate for the Department of Defense to wade into that matter because, hey, it's not your data pool. No, what data lake? It's not your lake. Trying to bring things, keep them all connected, team. But when he came in there and told me about it, and then I talked to the victim, and this has been reported, and he described it in such clinical terms as like, this is irrefutable. Now we can argue about who's responsible, what kind of weapon systems being used, what the motivation is, what the intent. We can spend the next 10 years doing studies on this, right? Which is kind of what the government does and Veterans Affairs does. I was like, we're not doing that. There are people out there. We are putting people in harm's way. So let's go ahead and do a holistic approach. Offense, defense, healthcare, policy, procedures, equipment needs, the whole 9 yards. And so that's what we started. And I have I'm not dodging you. I have no one briefed me or gave me definitive proof about anything that happened in the continental United States. Could have happened, don't know. Just didn't get to my level, or was still being researched. But that was the thing. I'm like, let's not study this to death. Let's go ahead and make sure we're taking care of our people. So never end a sentence with so, but that was my cue for Chris to pick it up.
No, I think you did a good job of that, Chris. I mean, my thinking is simply, and Mark's going to talk about this, I suspect, when he joins us in August and September, but just my study of what's happened with 29-155 and just Russian activities really to be a significant disruption and to sow disunity in the United States and to go after us in a Cold War on steroids like way. I think this is consistent with their behavior and what they're trying to do, directed against the United States. So it would.
We know how to, Chris. We know how to do that, man. And that was kind of my. It wasn't frustration, because what was really fascinating was you can't call them kids because that's ageist. The brilliant folks that we have that are younger than we are. I don't want general counsel coming on. I want to protect the International Spy Museum from any litigation. So I take full responsibility. You know what? I'll just say, we got these brilliant minds and young people, and it's like, they get it, man. And we got the frozen middle, dude. And I'm like, come on, we got to break through because we know how to do this. We've done it before. Let's get our muscle memory back. And that's what my thing was. And we had the talent, we had the skill, and they're much better than we ever were, Chris. They are so much better. Let's go ahead and listen to them. Let's give them a chance to go out there and do some stuff.
So, Chris, you touched on a question that I, as someone who went to several gas stations yesterday to fill up my tank, you would have thought I asked this question, but it came in, and I love the phrasing. What is up with Unit 29-155? And you answered that a bit, the disruption, but how can we protect U.S. infrastructure against cyber attack?
So President Biden signed an executive order that just this morning, I believe, on cyber defense. My understanding from an outside point of view, I've been watching what's been going on at the NSC, the National Security Council here in the United States. And it seems that an interagency process is diving deeper and deeper, doing an assessment, in essence, on how do we protect our infrastructure. as a result of solar winds, right? What was solar winds? That's the Russian getting in backdoor for programs, in security updates that all of a sudden allow backdoor access to our unclassified systems. And I've used this analogy before. It's the idea of a robber breaking into your house and you knowing that the robber's in your house, but you don't know where they are in your house. You just know they're there lurking somewhere. Pretty frightening. That's what's happened to some of our infrastructure. So yes, with the Colonial Pipeline, we see again, we are vulnerable. It seems that this might have been a criminal network. It almost is beside the point. It means that we have significant vulnerabilities. So the United States is going to continue to focus its policy on ensuring that we can redouble our focus on defending that infrastructure. That's what the president is trying to do with the executive order, and to really limit kind of these software programs and their entry into the U.S. government, in the U.S. government sphere. But remember, Colonial Pipeline is a private entity, right?
Yeah.
They weren't a U.S. government entity. But what it does, it's another, how many wake-up calls, another cliche, right, have we had in the last few years? It's just another wake-up call that we have to focus on our defenses. I'm confident in our our cyber attack capabilities, but we have to make sure that we can reduce our vulnerabilities. Easier said than done. I want to be sure I have some closing comments. I want to be able to have the final word when we're done, Amanda.
30 seconds, man. Can I get 30?
Yeah.
All right, I'm watching the clock. Mary Beth Long and others, I can't see our participants, but a lot of people have done a lot of good work. And current cyber czar, that's not his name. Who is he? The former deputy director of the NSA, Chris, I forgot his name.
Is it English?
What?
Is it English?
Yeah, English. I mean, so my thought isn't original at all, but what I've been thinking about lately, because they brought this up, that we overinvested in offensive capability. And what I'm really thinking through right now, and I'd love input from other people. You can send me hate mail or text me or something. But are we in the midst of a transition from the power of the offense to where the defense is going to become predominant in our warfighting construct? And I'm a heretic, because we're not going to buy all these gold-plated weapon systems. I'm kind of with them, where I think we need to consider whether we've overinvested offensively. And I think we might be in the midst of an historic transformation in the nature. It happens. It's like when the earth, magnetism changes every, 10, 25,000 years. I think we might be in the midst of a transition where the strength of the defense, we do it only like about every 100, 150 years militarily. So, okay, that was more than 30 seconds, Chris.
Amanda, do you have any closing comments, or would you like me to just jump in there?
I have things that I have to say. I can say them now or after you.
Let me just jump in there and get the final word. Chris, thanks for joining us today. It's been a great privilege to have a longtime colleague and friend do a informal spy chat. And
but let's be clear, I'm a subordinate, Chris. I always have been, and I'm good with that. I followed you throughout my career, man, and it's really developed me and meant the world to me. And to be able to do this with you today is just like, come on, man. How did this happen to us, that we've been so fortunate? And still, thanks for continuing to contribute in a really, really meaningful way, man.
Well, you made my point. My point I wanted to articulate was, despite all of the pressure that you've been under and you were under, not just in my old job as the CT director at the NSC, but then being confirmed and becoming the honorable and serving for a brief time at the National Counterterrorism Center, and then being vaulted to the position of acting Secretary of Defense when the nation was under great stress, a great deal of polarization, and you never lost your humanity. And that is the leadership lesson we'll close with.
Well, I want to thank you both. This was fascinating, and it was great to hear the rapport between you. I want to once again thank the Honorable Mary Beth Long for ongoing support of Spy Chat, and to our sponsor for today, SoftWolf. We really appreciate that. And we appreciate our attendees, and we look forward to seeing you. Our next noontime program is on May 19th, and we look at the surveillance industrial revolution with Barton Gelman. We have programs for young people and programs for older people, and we hope you will visit our calendar on the website. Check it out, sign up. And also, when you're at the Spy Museum website, should it occur to you, you can even click on a link right there and send us some much needed love in the form of money. We'll take your money and we will give you something in return, like conversation and thank you. And we look forward to you visiting the museum, and keep coming to these programs because we're still having them. Everyone, take care. Goodbye.